Well, first and foremost, thank you very, very, very much. If you think this is all I'm going to be saying, you got a lot coming. As Susan doesn't know, I'm somebody that can't say hello in 25 words or less. When she notified me that I was going to be the recipient this year, I was, shocked, frankly. I will tell you that this is a tremendous surprise. It's a great honor, and it is richly undeserved. I have to apologize to all the previous recipients for dragging down the lofty standards that you've established. But it's not my fault. They picked me, so I'm here. I'm very, very honored to have received this. And I want to say a few things, and I will try to be somewhat brief. But I want to say things about why I think libraries are important in this world today. We're all familiar with these gadgets, and we've seen the demise of newsprint and just about everything, because this is the information age and this is the information machine. And that has its benefits, for sure. But I want to tell you a couple of things. First off, I want to say that when I found out I was going to be the recipient, and I saw that Don was one of the previous recipients, and for those that don't know, and I think everybody does, that Don is Mr. Everybody for Topsham. He's a remarkable public servant, and it's an honor to know him. But when I saw that Don was one of the previous recipients, and I see that they've named the community room at the municipal building the Don Russell Room, and I'm thinking, well, gee, what am I, chopped liver here? So, what would be a nice way to recognize, my position within the community? And I gave it a lot of thought. And what I thought I would do is suggest that they could put up a very small plastic plaque with my name on it over one of the stalls in the men's room, because what would be more appropriate than a John and a John? So that being said, I want to tell you a couple brief stories that relate to why I think libraries are very, very important, maybe more so today than ever. And these are personal things. A number of years ago, June and I took a river cruise, and it started in Prague. And one of the places that we went was a place called the Lobkowitz Palace, which is on the grounds of the Prague Castle. I've never heard of the Lobkowitz family, and I was very interested to find out this was one of the most powerful royal families in Europe, princes, as it were. And they have now, there's a museum, which is their palace. One of the things you never want to do, if you know me, is go in with me to a museum or a library, because I go in one end and I never come out the other end. And this was one of those examples. But one of the things that we saw was in the music room. This was an incredibly powerful, incredibly wealthy family. And you go into the music room, and one of the things that they have on display, just one of the things they have on display, is the original manuscripts, or scores, I guess you would call them, for Beethoven's 3rd, 5th, and 6th symphonies. And they're dedicated to the prince. This is in Beethoven's own hand. And right next to it is a manuscript of notations to Handel's Messiah, written by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. The Lobkowitz prince was the sponsor, the patron of Beethoven. And we're looking at these original scores. I mean, they're behind a sheet of glass, needless to say, but if you're me, that's an awe-inspiring experience, to be able to see right in front of you the actual work. I suppose it's roughly equivalent when you go to the Library of Congress and you see the real Constitution and Declaration of Independence, and that's really John Hancock's signature. And that says something about me in terms of, you can't get that experience on this, in my opinion. Second story, and this is why I brought this up. Strangely enough, one of the things I did today, shockingly, is bring a book to a library. That's not a book. This is the book. And it's an interesting story. This book has a very catchy title. I'm sure you're all be dying to go out and get it. It's called The Visual Display of Quantitative Information. Is that a page turner or what? He was originally going to call it Harry Potter's The Visual Display of, but he figured it would be misleading people somewhat. This is a text written by a Yale professor. I went to a talk by this professor. His name is Edward Tufte, back in the early 80s. This is a long time ago. This is a remarkable book. It's not everybody's cup of tea. I think it is utterly fascinating. It is how to display effectively graphic information that is very dry and colorless. This book could not be published by a normal publisher. He did it himself because the illustrations in this book are so precise and so exacting that he had to do it himself. When I went to the talk, he was discussing this topic, which sounds very dry and is utterly fascinating. And one of the examples he used of an effective way of illustrating a concept in a text is to put the illustration in close proximity to the actual thing that is describing it. Put the illustration next to the text. Sounds simple. And he gave us one of the best examples of this from early on, Galileo. The reason I mention it, he had the actual book. He owns the copy of Galileo's early 1600s publication describing Saturn. First time it had ever been described. And what he says in the book, it looks like this, and there's this little illustration, which is his hand sketch of what Saturn looked like through his crude telescope. That book wasn't behind a glass case. That was right in front of us. He took it around the room. We could hold it. Now again, for some people, big deal. To me, that was an awe-inspiring experience. I mean, it's a book by Galileo, for heaven's sake, and it's right in front of me, and it was just remarkable. And this book here is similar in terms of, if you go through it, as dry as it sounds, it's a remarkable text. He wrote 2 more. I have all of them. He's the kind of professor I would have loved to have had. In that book is an illustration. This illustration. You can't really see it from there, and it's in French, and unless you know French, you wouldn't understand it anyway. But if I tell you what it's about, Mr. Tufte, who would be, I think, the world's foremost, and I don't even know if he's still alive, but the world's foremost expert on this type of graphical illustration, he says this is perhaps the finest example of graphic illustration ever been done. And it doesn't look like much. What you're seeing, and you're welcome to come up and look at it later, this will almost bring you to tears. This is just an illustration of Napoleon's march to Moscow and back. Napoleon started with 440,000 troops. He came back to Paris with 10,000 men. Think about that. What you see in this colored line is the diminishing number of troops superimposed on location, temperature. It's incredible. You look at it and your heart bleeds. And why do I show you that? It's in this book. You don't get that kind of stuff in this. It's a tactile, visual experience. Books are remarkable things. And where do you find books? In libraries. One of the previous recipients of this award was a fellow by the name of Don Sanders, who put books in buses, school buses. What could be more important than getting books in the hands of kids because of this? Because everybody has these. These things are handy for information and entertainment. There's no counterbalancing anymore, to my way of thinking. You're putting books on buses and you're bringing them to the attention of kids, and apparently the program was very successful and kids loved it. And I think it's a shame, but I understand why, because everything else has been screwed up by the pandemic, why that had to stop, but I'm hoping that that can be put back together again. Maybe I can be
Yep.
part of that. But my point here, and I do have one, is that libraries are important because this is so ubiquitous. And the problem, as I see it, and this is just my opinion, with these devices, is that they're too easy. It's instantaneous reinforcement. Positive. The life doesn't work the way these things work in terms of entertainment and whatever. So that when somebody goes on one of these things and is looking for something, these devices are not ambivalent. Not anymore, particularly in the world of social media. If you click on something, it knows you might be interested in that. And so it'll feed you more. And if you click on that, it will feed you more and more and more. And what happens, in my opinion, is that you have a world of information that is continually being narrowed down based on feeding you what you think you like to hear. There's nobody out there saying, but there's another viewpoint. That's not important. That doesn't sell anything. So what you want is more and more, and you get more and more information on a continually narrowing rabbit hole. And the joke is eventually you know everything about nothing. And you're thoroughly convinced that yours is the only opinion that's correct because you've never heard anything else. You've searched your way to the bottom of the pile and there's nothing left. I think libraries have an important role in addressing that. Because who doesn't go into a library? Anybody. And maybe be looking for a particular book and doesn't kind of browse the stacks. It's interesting. You kind of look at the jackets. It sort of almost forces you to examine other things, other viewpoints, other authors, other anything. You don't do that here. This doesn't do that. This tells you what it thinks you want to know. And I just think that we need desperately the counterpoint that libraries provide, and especially to those guys right there, my granddaughters in San Francisco and Maine. I want them to know that books are important and books are exciting things. They fire your imagination. They create wonder and magic. This provides information and entertainment. And it's wonderful. I mean, it's fantastic. But you have to recognize, I think, the limitations that are associated with it, particularly with social media. And you're all reading the news about that today. But libraries, I think, are important in addressing that. I would close by saying, in winning this award, I almost felt like I'll reference a book. Harry Potter, The Goblet of Fire. Remember that? There's a scene where the goblet is spitting out the names of the 3 competitors for the Tri-Wizard competition. Remember that? And then it spits out a 4th name, and it's Harry Potter. And that's sort of my reaction when I was notified of this award. Everybody knows, nobody knows how his name got in the goblet, but everybody knows he's not qualified. So, in closing, you can start applauding now, you can even close. Libraries are vital. What I am hopeful for, and I keep coming back to the Harry Potter theme because kids love it. What I'm hopeful of is that through programs like the Book Bag on a Bus and other efforts to reach particularly kids, to show them the wonder of these places and the wonder of books, is that this institution and all other institutions like it can become the Hogwarts of children. Places of wonder, places where witches and wizards are created, because that's what they are. This is the magic. This is just very useful information. God, how do we get anywhere without GPS? You know, that kind of thing. But books are what create, this creates information. It does not create intelligence. It does not create wisdom. It does not create knowledge. It just creates information. It makes it available to you. What libraries do, what books do, is give you an opportunity, properly exercised, to explore, formulate opinions, see divergent viewpoints, be objective. We need a little more of that these days. Thank you so much for this award.